Good evening and welcome to the show. It's always good to have your company, but tonight it's a special edition that I know you will enjoy. Shortly, the irrefutable evidence proving beyond doubt that Australia is now a global energy leper, so out of step with modern technology and international trends. I'll cross to Europe and Canada in just a moment, where our experts will present the evidence on nuclear power and show us the benefits from a reactor in operation. Also tonight, the bank's taking the lead in getting workers out of their homes and back to the office. Recruitment expert Wynn on that and more on the workplace. And our news panellist tonight, former radio man Jim Ball, and my colleague here at ADH TV, Daisy Cousens. They have one message for the one bank, and it won't be too kind. Plus another spit in the eye for Israel from the Australian Labor government. We'll look at what's been happening in South Korea in the last 24 hours with Colonel Grant Newsham. He'll enlighten us on why the country has descended into political madness. A busy show ahead of us, and it all starts now. Well, I think there are some education boffins in this country who should hang their heads in shame tonight, because the debate over modern day teaching fads is over. They never ever worked. They just thwarted our kids' education. Here's the indisputable evidence. A Catholic school cluster in the ACT and Goulburn Archdiocese has shot to success in this year's NAPLAN results after abandoning modern teaching fads. A return to old school teaching styles, including direct instruction, has delivered academic dividends for 23,000 students at 56 Catholic schools based on the NAPLAN results released today. Isn't this good news? This tells us all we need to know about the dysfunctional modern teaching methods which have put the onus on teams of students teaching themselves, and which has seen the memorising of sight words overtake the proven phonics system of spelling. The Australian reported today that for years, Catholic schools had underperformed. Until 2020, this archdiocese adopted direct instruction or explicit teaching through what's called the Catalyst Project. 4 years later, voila, the schools have caught up to deliver their best ever NAPLAN results. Students who fell behind have made substantial progress to catch up, and the incidence of disruptive behaviour has reduced because the kids are now far more engaged. You know, after every election, governments pour billions more into their state and federal education systems. And yet Australia has lagged behind all the G20 equivalent rated nations in subjects like English and maths. Well, we now know why. Australian educators were just getting better and more efficient at using the wrong teaching methods. We had perfected the art of ruining generations of learning opportunities. The new fads were hopeless. We don't need political parties to double the education budget anymore. We just need to throw out the fads and go back to the basics of teaching, face-to-face, explicit teaching in the classroom. The Catalyst program ensures that new information is embedded in students' long-term memory. Students are given time to practice and repeat concepts until they've mastered them. These now successful schools threw away the concept of student-directed learning and expecting students to lead their own learning journey. It should never ever return to our classrooms anywhere in the country. What should anger parents of students who have now just left school is that education boffins in this country have robbed their children of a quality education. Your suspicions that new novel methods were rubbish were absolutely dead right. Now, 2 other schools in poor socio-economic districts of Sydney need to be included in this story. They've had similar results this year after returning to explicit teaching. They were Canley Vale High and Fairfield West public schools with high concentrations of refugees, but schools which took the initiative to go back to the future. As of today, parents in the vast majority of Australian schools, both public and private, should cite these real-life experiments in the ACT, Goulburn and in Sydney South West when they next see their school executive or teacher. They should demand a dramatic and immediate return to old school teaching methods and the adoption of the Catalyst program. Get the kids out of groups and teams and put them back in rows old school. Dig out the old colour-coded phonic cards and start all over again. Get them chanting their times tables just like their parents did. And maybe in 4 years from now, Australian education standards will then catch up to the rest of the first world. It is proof positive that in education, it's quality, old-school teaching that works best, not novel fads from hippie public servants who want change for the sake of it. Now, you're about to get two priceless perspectives on nuclear energy. I say priceless because they come from two individuals who've done their due diligence on the role nuclear will play in the future of baseload power around the world. Shortly, I'll cross to my colleague Nick Cater, who's in Ontario, Canada, to see for himself the enormous transition that country is making from coal to nuclear. But first to Europe, where the Chief Executive of the Coalition for Conservation, Cristina Talacko, has been talking nuclear with world leaders. Cristina attended COP29 in Azerbaijan as well, where nuclear took centre stage this year. Cristina Talacko joins us now from Paris. Cristina, welcome to ADH TV.
Hi, Chris.
You describe COP29 as a reality conference. What role did nuclear play then at COP29?
Yeah, I did describe it as reality conference, and I think it's because it felt like the moment we started facing these hard truths about meeting net zero goals. So the conversations around energy in COP, we can see it quite vividly being there, that it matured and countries and stakeholders are now so aware of this monumental task ahead of them to reach carbon neutrality. And that's precisely why nuclear now plays such a key role at COPs. So last year, you might have seen that at COP28 in Dubai, there was this announcement to triple nuclear capacity by 2050. And I believe momentum was carried into Baku. It was quite easy to see that so many other countries have now declared bold plans, and 6 more countries have pledged to triple nuclear this year as well. So I attended many events, and there were panels, there were announcements everywhere, everything going from advanced nuclear technologies to how nuclear revolutionizes the hard-to-abate industries and data centers, how countries like Canada, for example, and Italy are bringing nuclear back to ensure, of course, their energy security and stability. And I've even seen, very interestingly, major shipping firms considering nuclear energy now and to power their vessels and provide electricity to their port operations. So I believe people really moved beyond the debate. There's a focus on the facts now. They're pragmatic. They know that nuclear will be needed. It's reliable, it's scalable, and it's essential, as we know, to balance renewables and to decarbonize industry.
And in the midst of all of that, the US and the UK approaches Australia about working on nuclear solutions, right?
Yes, as we know, the UK and the US are very interested in partnering with Australia in nuclear beyond AUKUS and even beyond defence.
So Chris Bowen's refusal to talk about nuclear solutions must have been a shock to our closest allies.
Well, I don't think it shocked them because most of our allies, they understand the position that Australia has taken on nuclear, and it's well known, but it certainly, I think, left them wondering, how do we plan to hit our net zero targets without considering nuclear? That's the part that shocks them, So I had discussions, for example, with many leaders, including the CEO of the World Nuclear Association, who's been following quite closely what's happening in the Australian debate on nuclear, and she thinks that it's a missed opportunity not to align with our allies who are ready to help us to succeed in building an industry in Australia. And that same feeling was expressed to me by many other industry associations around, that were present at COP, and many international energy leaders. They're all convinced that we cannot reach net zero without nuclear energy, and they're very open to really exchanging and supporting us, even offering insights from their own programs, like the US Advanced Nuclear Reactors Program. They're very happy for us to participate, to join. So it's very clear to me that they view Australia as a very important partner in this global nuclear landscape.
Yeah, I think at the moment with the current government, they may be bitterly disappointed. And we keep hearing from our government, Cristina, talk about how distinct our solar advantages are in Australia. But if you take the UAE, it's got distinct solar advantages as well. But what are they doing about nuclear?
Yeah, we keep hearing that the reason why we're pursuing this 100% renewable pathway in Australia is because, of our solar and wind advantages, which we have, of course. But when I tell that to experts, energy experts around the world, they immediately ask, but wind and solar are intermittent. So what type of base load power is going to ensure reliability for Australia? So that's a consistent question that highlights that gap in our strategy, in the sense that the UAE, for example, they've developed Baraka, which is in operation, and I was very privileged last year to actually visit Baraka with a group of delegates, and I couldn't resist and ask that question that you asked me to their CEO, who was present at our meeting. I said, why has the UAE decided to develop nuclear when you've got plenty of sun? And his answer was pretty bold, pretty direct. And he said, well, nuclear, I remember very well, he said, nuclear is our insurance. So they took a pragmatic approach. They embraced solar in a big way, as we know. They have one of the largest solar farms in the UAE, but they recognize the importance of having a very stable, reliable energy source that nuclear can complement, and nuclear felt into that category for them. So it's a lesson in planning in the long term for Australia that we could learn from, is the UAE, as you mentioned.
Absolutely. So right now, it's fair to say Australia sits alone and isolated in this international community on the subject of energy.
Yes, well, like I mentioned, I'm yet to meet an international politician or an international energy expert or organization that thinks that we can reach carbon neutrality just with renewables. So whether they're on the left or right side of politics, they all stress to us the need of a mixed energy system, an all of the above approach, and that we need either hydro or nuclear, or if you are not as concerned about getting to net zero, then gas. Which is, I think, what this government is thinking, is continuing to rely on gas. And beyond the grid, all of these people tell me, well, we can't see how a renewable-only plan could decarbonize also heavy industry, shipping, transport, provide abundant, reliable energy for data centers, and so on. So I do think, unfortunately, at the moment, Australia's this reluctance to engage in nuclear feels very out of step with the global trend, especially when we have all the potential for developing more uranium, and they know they're very interested in our uranium reserves and being part of that supply chain. I'll give you an example. I attended about a week ago a very interesting conference here in Brussels. I'm in Europe at the moment, and there were about 40 companies there and organizations like the World Economic Forum. They came together. They're trying to scale up in nuclear energy to improve supply chains and to create these standardized practices to ramp up. And I'm not lying, they're talking about 10 terawatts of nuclear power globally in the next decade. So in that room, Chris, there were some of the smartest people in the world coming from Microsoft, from Tractable, from Schneider Electric, you name it, all these organizations and corporates. And they get it. These companies really get it. They know that nuclear is key to a carbon neutral world and a reliable future in energy. So, but sadly, I was the only Australian there, which was a bit of a proud moment, but also a wake-up call that the rest of the world is moving full speed ahead, and we're not engaging. We're just simply not engaging in this push.
not engaging and, I guess, effectively going backwards because we're not getting a start in this realm of energy, which is such a crying shame. A terrific insight from you, who have experienced so much in the last couple of months. The Chief Executive of the Coalition for Conservation, Cristina Talacko, thank you very much for your time from Paris.
My pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
Which brings us to the Canadian nuclear story. There are crucial similarities between Canada and Australia in terms of our economy, population and, of course, landmass. The country is undergoing a major transition in baseload power. They're going from coal to nuclear. And the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station, located on the north shore of Lake Ontario, is in the throes of a major refurbishment. And that's where my colleague Nick Cater is as I speak, with a case study all Australians can learn from. Nick, good to have you on the program. What's the Darlington nuclear story?
Well, they set out here, they began in 2003, Chris, and decided they wanted to do away with coal. That was because of the particulate matter, that was because of the smog in the atmosphere rather than climate change, but they set themselves that goal. And by 2014, they did it. So this is of course, as you know, it's the most populous and the biggest industrial state in province in Canada, Ontario. They managed to get rid of coal completely, and they did that by ramping up nuclear plus hydro. They've got a lot of hydro here, of course, a bit more than we have. But that's where they got to this wonderful position now. And the Darlington plant, which provides up to a third of the power for the entire province, is at the key to it. They've got 4 reactors there. They're renovating 3 already, or refurbished 3, a 4th one ready to go. These things have been running for many years now. It's a very comfortable situation, and one that Chris Bowen should be looking at if he really is serious about getting to low carbon electricity.
This plant now does the nuclear medical isotopes as well, doesn't it?
It does. It's got this whole side business going on. It also produces some rare metals as well as a side product from this. And this is very helpful, of course. It does mostly what Lucas Heights does for us, but also produces a lot of electricity, so much so that most of the time, like right now, they're exporting it to Quebec, the neighbouring province, and across the United States, to New York State, and into the Detroit area where they're desperately in need of electricity. So it's a really good success story, and I just don't know why Chris Bowen passes this by and dismisses it when it clearly is a great example of what we can do if we just put the time and investment into it.
You were so right with this. 15% of the nation's power comes from their 18 operable nuclear reactors now, and they're building both large-scale and small modular reactors, aren't they?
Well, it's the small modular reactors that I was particularly keen to see. This is, as you know, it's new technology. It's not been developed to a commercial level yet in the West, but they've committed to it here. They want to build 4 boiling water reactor from the Hitachi plant in Japan. They want to put those in. They're working on the first now. They've got as far as a lot of the groundwork is there. They're beginning to dig tunnels to bring the water in. They're hoping to get final approval middle of next year, by the middle of next year, for the go-ahead to bring the reactor itself in. And then they are optimistic they'll have this thing up and running on the grid by 2028. So that's 8 years from start to finish. One of the great things about these small modular reactors is you can do it relatively quickly. And that's the first one. The following ones will be quicker, they expect, because they've got the expertise and a sort of production line going. But what they're saying now is that they could have done with more conventional reactors, because the demand for electricity, Chris, as you know, is going through the roof. The forecasts of what you're going to need in 2050 is getting higher and higher by the day as all the demand kicks in from artificial intelligence and computer storage. So they're now going to keep this program going, and they're looking for a new site elsewhere in Canada, in one of the former coal-fired power stations, where they can convert it to a new nuclear reactor. They just realize, you just cannot have too much electricity in this day and age.
And of course, that skyrocketing demand is exactly our immediate future as well. Chris Bowen should be there, not Nick Cater. Nick, it's where he should be going to do his due diligence about the technological future, the opportunities that may apply to Australia, instead of burying his ideological head in the sand.
I wonder if he's ever been to a nuclear power plant, Chris. I mean, this is the third one I've been to now this year. I went to the one in Finland at Olkiluoto 3. I went to the one in Hungary, which is a Russian-era nuclear power station, but it's going just fine. It's when you get up close to them and you see it and you see the safety that's put in place. I mean, I was checked 5 times on the way out to see if I had any radiation in me. I didn't, of course, because you come some way distant from the reactor. But I looked at the spent nuclear fuel sitting there in a water tank, perfectly safe, and it'll sit there for 10 years until the radiation starts to diminish. I could see all this, and when you're up close to it, the fear element starts to disappear completely. You see this is a very safe, very clean way of producing electricity, and efficient and reliable. It's exactly what we need, and I really hope that I think it's going to take a change of government, isn't it? But we've got to get onto this bandwagon soon, because I just don't see how we can fulfill our energy ambitions without it.
Yeah, you're not wrong. What you're doing now, I want to see more of it, and we will on ADH TV. We look forward to that. But I want to throw something at you after a text message I've just received from an emergency services official out in the New South Wales Far West. He has just told me that the power is out again in Broken Hill and the Far West region. Are you surprised by that from what you've seen going there?
I'm not, Chris, because that Broken Hill is supplied by a 260-kilometre high-voltage power line, which was built in the 70s, built with inferior steel. Those things are not galvanised, those towers. Sooner or later, one of them's going to come down. And once they do that, well, it's cut off from the grid. It becomes a little microgrid. They've got a battery, sure, they've got solar, they've got wind, but what we learned last time is that just doesn't work. You know, they're having to fall back on diesel to keep power in the Broken Hill and the entire Far West region, you know, in Wilcannia and places like that, that are linked to that same grid. It's just an illustration. You cannot get by without reliable baseload. And with nuclear, of course, you now have these micro-modular reactors, which are perfect for somewhere like Broken Hill. You could put a couple of those in and you could power Broken Hill just fine 24 hours a day.
Exactly. Nick Cater, great to have you on the program from Ontario, Canada. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris.
There you go. That's exactly where the Prime Minister and the climate czar, Chris Bowen, should be, in Canada, to see how nuclear operates under their system and with their population and in their far-flung areas like Ontario. This is a replica of the kind of technology we could adopt in Australia and drive our bills down, not spike them up, which is the case right now in this country. It's got to happen. And we'll see more of what Nick has to report from Darlington over the course of the next couple of days on ADH TV. More coming up right after this. Okay, it's time to decode the biggest stories from here and abroad today. Let's bring in our news panellists, former Talkback Radio King Jim Ball and my colleague here at ADH TV, YouTuber Daisy Cousens. Welcome to you both. The Albanese government Chris. Will again break from Israel by switching Australia's stance on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a series of high-profile United Nations votes. Foreign Minister Penny Wong will support a resolution aimed at creating an irreversible pathway to a Palestinian state. Now, the United Nations General Assembly in New York is voting on 3 motions, and a government leak today reveals that Labor will switch from its voting record on some of these issues to back a 2-state solution. Now, Peter Dutton has accused Albanese of abandoning the Jewish community.
They've completely abandoned the Jewish community. The state of Israel, there is a lot of anger, understandably, in the community at the moment with the way in which the government has sold out the Jewish community. And I think the Prime Minister stands condemned, because when you ask yourself, why would the Prime Minister sacrifice his credibility and backflip on the commitment he gave? It's for votes. He sold the Jewish community out in this country for green votes in Western Sydney and in places like Marrickville.
Daisy, do you agree with Peter Dutton when push comes to shove, re-election is the only thing that matters to this government?
Look, it certainly seems so. This is quite an extraordinary move. I mean, these are very sort of extreme positions that are being proposed by the UN, and the Albanese government is just voting yes to them. I mean, aside from the fact that, as lots of people have said, Liberals have said, it just rewards terrorists, it rewards them for bad behaviour. Palestine, as it is, doesn't actually qualify as a state. Like there are certain conditions that you have to fulfil to be considered a functional state. That's why there's such a thing as failed states. One of those things that you need to have is, funnily enough, a functioning government. And at the moment, they simply don't, for obvious reasons. They also don't have a functioning economy, which you also, I believe, need to be a state. So the whole idea of actually voting for Palestinian statehood and a two-state solution is, at least at the moment, ridiculous, because Palestine doesn't qualify as a state. So I don't know what the Albanese government can be up to other than, as you've said, gunning for re-election.
Apart from what Daisy's saying, Jim, I think you've got to add to that the fact that the Palestinians have to agree to break from Hamas and then cease any retribution towards Israel. And until those measures are promised or agreed to, how can you even get into the UN and start voting?
Well, you simply can't. As Daisy said, if you want to be a state, you've got to act like a state, and they don't do that. Remember, no other country in that area, UAE, Egypt, Jordan, none of them will take any refugees from those from Gaza, for example.
That's right.
But look, just let's go back to the 9th of October. That's when this sequence started, not the 7th, the 9th. That is when this sequence of steps started, and that place, ground zero, was the Opera House steps on October 9. Chris, I'll never forget that quote by Douglas Murray a few days after the event, and it flushed out a lot of people. He said that when a flare goes up at night in a war zone, you get to see where everyone stands. And that's so true. And of course, the usual suspects, we expect to see them. But what we didn't expect to see this time round was the unusual suspect, people like my local federal member, Teal, Sophie Scompson McKellar. She was one of the first to come out of the woodworks and say that we should be more, acknowledge more the plight of the Palestinians. Well, everyone does. But for my entire lifetime, their behaviour has been absolutely reprehensible. And you notice how quickly the once traditional, what would you call it, the wall of alliance between, say, Israel and Australia, Israel and the West generally, once two or three, like the Scompses of this world, fractured that wall, breached that wall, it made it acceptable for everybody else. So now it's rapidly, anti-Semitism is rapidly becoming a norm. And that reference to the Opera House, that concerns an essay by Alan Howe in the Australian last weekend. And he chronicles the entire, how that all came about, that demonstration that turned violent, gassed the Jews and all that kind of stuff, all presented by, and the responsible party was a pissweak, pusillanimous and a totally feckless and unworldly police leadership in New South Wales. The judgment was appalling. And so the Opera House, as I said, their steps was ground zero. Yeah. Here's what, can I just say very quickly, Howe wrote on the weekend, once given the green light on the mob had been primed and the Opera House riot was inevitable, and for pro-Palestinian protesters across the country, that has led directly to the firebombing and vandalising of MPs' offices, attacks on Jews, and the illegal occupation of the University of Melbourne, perhaps the national headquarters of Jew-hating Australia, and also Sydney University. And so, Chris, this is where it all began. And now it's on the floor of the UN. Yeah. That's where all this started. This was the kindling that lit the fire that's about to explode on the floor of the UN.
And now aided and abetted by our own Foreign Minister and our own Prime Minister.
Yep.
Now, politicians are calling on the Commonwealth Bank to rethink a move that means a group of customers will face a $3 fee for withdrawing cash from branches. From January, the CBA will close complete access accounts and move those customers to its main transaction account, which charges people a $3 fee for an assisted withdrawal. Customers and several MPs today pledged to leave the bank over the decision. You can't blame them at all, can you, Daisy?
No, you certainly can't blame them at all. This is quite a hefty fee, and just in principle, in the cost of living crisis, it's not a great thing to put. I believe the bank has stepped back a little bit from this proposal, thanks to customer backlash, because it has been considerable and understandably so. So I guess we'll see where the bank goes on this, but it's certainly not a good sign for the bank. And if they go ahead with it, I would expect a mass exodus of customers. Absolutely.
Yeah, find another bank, shop around for another bank. Jim, such a fee can only hurt one demographic. You know who that is, the elderly.
Yep, totally. I mean, have these people not learned anything at all from about the public mood? This sort of this kind of stuff in recent times. In America, you had that Bud Light business with the whole transgender thing. Recently, like 2 days ago, I'm old enough to remember that. You had pubs and Australia Day.
Yes.
Now they've backed down on that. These corporates just seem to be putting their foot in it all the time. They can't seem to get it right. 2 questions for the CBA. Whose money is it anyway? And what's the cost to CBA? Why are they doing this? They quite willingly accept your money, but as soon as you want to withdraw it, they want to charge you for the privilege.
They've got to start reading the room, Jim. Just like the pub business, they've got to read the room. I want to move on to Sydney's restaurateurs, if I can. Leading Sydney restaurateurs say Australians don't want to work hospitality jobs, voicing concern the federal government and opposition's vocal efforts to slash migration and curb foreign students are stifling their industry. Now, a report released by Business New South Wales today found 8 in 10 businesses have had to boost pay or offer better conditions over the past year to stay competitive in the battle for skilled workers. And Judy McMahon, owner of the very popular Catalina restaurant in Rose Bay, said more than half of her employees were on visas. They're crying for skills, Daisy.
They certainly are, it would seem. But the thing is, what we see here is actually very revealing of what happens when you don't let tons and tons and tons of immigrants in, of unskilled and skilled migrants. If you look there, because of a lack of migrants, these restaurants had to improve conditions and also to improve wages. Now, that is a very, very key point there. If you look at countries that are, say, flooded with illegal immigrants, they're flooded with people who will work for $2 an hour in terrible conditions. If you eliminate that, then businesses are actually forced to improve their modus operandi. In Australia, we don't have the mass problem with illegal immigration, thank goodness, but we do have an awful lot of people coming in, as we've all spoken about. So there it is, everyone. In practice, if you have less droves of immigrants coming in, businesses are forced to improve wages and improve their conditions, and the government doesn't have to mandate it in any way.
Yeah, I want to talk to Graham Wynn a little later in the program a little bit further on this issue about making sure that we get the right people filling the job vacancies. But Jim, I want to take you to the United States, if I may. President Joe Biden facing a backlash from Democrats, angry over his decision to pardon his son, a move that blunts their line of attack on Donald Trump, of course. Here's one Colorado Democrat, Senator Michael Bennet. He wrote on social media, Biden's decision placed personal interest ahead of duty and further erodes Americans' faith that the justice system is fair and equal for more. As soon as Trump uses his pardon powers, the Dems can't say a word, Jim.
No, they're snookered. They held themselves out to be the moralisers, high moral ground and all of that kind of thing. But they have snookered themselves. This has basically just ruined their entire, I don't know what their agenda was when they go into opposition or Trump takes over. But, Chris, this was one of those last-minute mop and bucket clean up in aisle 5 things that Joe Biden had to do. You've got to give it to the Biden crime family, though. They are trailer trash, venal, corrupt hillbillies right to the very end. And this pardon was nothing to do with Hunter Biden. This was to do with Joe Biden, because he is the godfather of the group. And they all knew that if he went on trial, particularly with a DOJ like Pam Bondi as Attorney General, that they would be asking very, very uncomfortable questions. Yeah. And I heard I don't know if it's true or not, that Hunter Biden has said to the old man, "Hey, listen, Dad, if you don't give me a pardon, I'm going to go viral with all of our stuff. I'm going to put it," and of course that would be enough, I would think, anybody to convince them to issue the pardon. But of course, if, for example, he gets hauled between Congress, now he can't be convicted for any crimes, but he can be compelled to answer uncomfortable questions, and he can't go for the Fifth Amendment about incriminating himself. So really, it's taken years for this stuff to finally come to the fore. But fortunately, it's all coming out now. What a lot of us knew for many, many, many years that have been following this stuff, now everyone knows about it. There's no hiding it. The cockroaches are coming out of the cracks and out of the crevices and from under the floorboards.
Yeah, it's a lot more daisy than simply trying to go in and save his son. As a matter of fact, if he was trying to do his son a favour, he would have kept out of it and allowed his son to accept the consequences.
Yes, I mean, theoretically he would. It was interesting reading Joe Biden's statement on why he actually made the pardon. I mean, we all know, as Jim said, it was probably to save himself, and also, he would love his son, as a parent you would. But he was saying that the reason that people went after Hunter was political. He said, my enemies in Congress went after him. No one would have gone to jail for filling out a form wrong, and that was regarding the gun charge that he was on. And the thing is, let's be fair, possibly that's at least partially true. I mean, it was very beneficial for the Republicans to go after Hunter Biden, wanting to land even more blows on Joe via his family. But that two things are true at once here. Yes, it's probably true that so much emphasis was put on Hunter Biden because of the politics of it, but it's also true that he did the wrong thing. Yep. And there were some very unwholesome things on that Hunter Biden laptop that I don't believe have gone through the courts yet, without going into too much detail. So I understand very much why Joe Biden has done this pardon, and it is great news for Donald Trump, because now he can pardon all the J6s on day one and no one can say a thing.
And that's exactly what he will do. If he had any doubt beforehand, he doesn't have any now. Jim Ball, Daisy Cousens, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
We'll go to a break right now. Plenty more coming up, including a rundown on what's happening in South Korea, where the president is about to get the boot. Good to have your company tonight. Let's get into this. Well, after a 2-year investigation, a committee of the United States Congress has concluded that the COVID-19 virus leaked from the lab known as the Wuhan Institute of Virology. In a 520-page report released yesterday, the House of Representatives Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis also confirmed that it was US National Institutes of Health funded gain-of-function research which was being undertaken when the virus escaped. The House committee reviewed more than 1 million pages of documents and held 2 days of interviews with Anthony Fauci, the government scientist who led the US public health response. Republicans on the committee also accused Fauci of causing the worst pandemic in a century by approving funding for Chinese scientists they believe manufactured the virus that caused COVID-19. Fauci, of course, ran the World Health Organization line that the Chinese lab wasn't to blame, that it was more like a virus from exotic animals in the Wuhan wet market. Rubbish. The House probe also found that lockdowns did more harm than good, and mask mandates were ineffective at controlling the spread of COVID-19. All the things that Australian politicians and health officials everywhere got so wrong as well. And how's this? The report also stated that Taiwan notified the World Health Organization on December 31, 2019 about atypical pneumonia cases reported in Wuhan and asked the agencies to investigate. But the WHO ignored the warnings. And as we know, the WHO automatically caved into pressure from the Chinese Communist Party about where the virus originated. And this same mob wants the world to give them global control in the event of any further health crises. Only the most foolish politician would ever consider such a demand. The WHO should be disbanded, not given universal power. Well, South Korea has been thrown into political and social turmoil after a short-lived martial law declaration was suddenly lifted. President Yoon Suk-yeol enacted martial law overnight, only to lift it a short time later as he said the nation's democracy was under threat by anti-state forces. Colonel Grant Newsham joins the program right now. Grant, why the yo-yo with martial law? Can you explain how this is being carried out?
Sure. It looks like President Yoon was really at wit's end ever since he took power in May 2022. The National Assembly, which is dominated by the opposition, the Democratic Party, has done everything they can to just make his life miserable. They've impeached him 22 times. They've just cut his recent budget request in half. They're going after his wife. They're impeaching his top officials. And they have done nothing that a loyal opposition would do. This is pretty extreme. And he just sort of, I think he got some bad advice, actually, from the head of the military, who told him, look, if you declare martial law, we can get a handle on this. And I think he did roll the dice and didn't go very well. Turns out even his own party was against it. The opposition, of course, was. The military support was actually pretty lukewarm about it as well. And there was no public sort of groundswell of support for what he tried to do. So he had to back down when the members of the assembly who could get in to the National Assembly voted unanimously to rescind the martial law. So that's what President Yoon did. But this is something to understand. You've kind of got to go back about 7 years or so when a fellow named Moon Jae-in was elected president in South Korea. And this is pretty much sort of a later stage of what I would call Korean leftists trying to just eviscerate the Conservative Party and to turn the place into a one-party state. So when Yoon said there's pro-North Korea elements in the opposition, he was actually right. But what he did to try and go about to deal with that, well, the results speak for themselves.
He's now being called on to resign along with his entire cabinet. Is that possible?
I think it is. This really was an embarrassment for him, of course, but for South Korea as well, and for his administration. This is sort of Banana Republic stuff. Not even that good, actually. And it is, I think, unfortunate because he has been a very good statesman when it comes to foreign affairs and pushing South Korea's interests in the world. But I think he's going to have to resign. If he doesn't and he's impeached, then he is in actually far more immediate legal jeopardy and faces some real punishment if he gets impeached. So resigning would be probably the prudent move for him to take.
Tell me about politics in South Korea. It doesn't necessarily get to this degree often, but boy, oh boy, they have considerable political fragility, don't they? Always have.
They have, and it's been sort of democratic for about 40 years or so, but it's always been a pretty sharp-elbowed business, even by the business of politics. And what you have, though, in the Korean political world, which isn't well recognized, particularly in America, is you have got a chunk of the leftist sort of part of the spectrum that really is pro-North Korea, pro-China. They're anti-American. They see the Americans as occupiers who keep the peninsula divided. Mm-hmm. And it is about that bad. These are in Korea, they're called radicals from the 1980s, which would be like America's or Australia's student radicals from the 60s, mm-hmm. who never changed. And they're called Jusapa. And the President Moon Jae-in that I mentioned, it was one of those. People around him were, and a lot of the key figures in the Democratic Party are as well. And these guys, believe it or not, they think North Korea is the superior example to how to run a country. They think China is where North Korea or South Korea's interests lie. And as I said, there's a strain of anti-Americanism in this part of the political class that really can move a country where it doesn't want to go. But the U.S. has pretended it doesn't exist, or is claiming our alliance was forged in bloodshed in the Korean War, therefore we'll pretend everything's okay. But the Korean leftists are something to be worried about. It is important to note, though, that most Koreans don't want to live in a North Korean kind of society. And most of them do support the U.S.-Korea military alliance. But as I said, a hardcore group of ruthless radicals can take a country different places. But the U.S. government, successive administrations have all tried to gloss over this part of the Korean political dynamic.
Yeah. There's a lot more to come and to play out in the days ahead, no doubt. Grant Newsham, thank you very much for your time.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Colonel Grant Newsham there from Hawaii. We'll be back after a quick break. Do not go anywhere. Time to talk jobs. Now, the Australian Core Skills Occupation List was published this week, outlining the key industries where government believes migrants can fill an employee shortfall. Some of the 456 occupations listed included jewellery designers, yoga instructors and flower growers. But there were a few notable absences. Graham Wynn from Superior People Recruitment joins us now from Melbourne. Graham, thank you for your time. Who was missing from this list?
Yeah, good afternoon, Chris. There were quite a few in the construction industry, believe it or not, is what's been missing. So people who drive bulldozers, excavators, hoists, lift operators, drillers, any machinery operating kind of jobs are missing. So they've got trades like carpenters and electricians, but anything to do with machinery operating, they've missed all those off. So they're not on the skilled list. That's a very good question. They haven't come with an answer why yet, but apparently what their theory is, we're missing more of the hands-on trades like carpenters, electricians, etc. They don't see machinery operating jobs as a skill people have, because I must think machinery does it automatically by itself rather than somebody operating the machinery. So all those machinery operating jobs are missed off the list. But as you say, we've got yoga in there, flower designers, jewellery makers. I'm pretty sure we don't have a shortage of yoga teachers in Australia, so why that's on the list, I don't know. And I would have thought enough flower designers as well these days. But seriously, I don't know where they get this idea from that their shortage is.
It's baffling, Graham. It's baffling. Why does the government believe it's better to import those skills rather than have them homegrown, for instance?
I don't know, because a yoga course, you can do it at a weekend probably yourself, can't you? There's not a lot of training involved with it. I've seen flower arranging classes, for a one-day flower arranging class. So there's not a high skill set. You can do that course. Whereas operating machinery, that's a real skill. It's a real skill. You can't just jump on an excavator and drive it. You just can't do that. So it's almost like they're sort of, in some way, appealing to the minority groups again a little bit, who like this yoga and that kind of thing. They're appealing to that minority group, saying, well, let's have more of you, rather than the construction. And we know we've got a housing shortage. And you can't build houses without excavators.
Well, you can't build houses if you're a yoga instructor. Oh, look, Graham,
no.
This is so important to get the mix right. If you want to solve the housing crisis, if you want to bring in migration that actually adds value to the country, you've got to get this stuff right, don't you?
Absolutely right. And you can't build a house, as you say, with a yoga instructor or a flower designer. They can do the garden possibly, but the house itself, you need people who can build it and operate machinery, and those people are not on the skilled list. And I know myself from talking to employers, other recruiters, we have none here who do that work.
Yeah.
We've got a shortage of machinery operators.
All right.
Because it's not taught anywhere at all. No. So therefore, it's not what they're doing is not going to help the housing crisis.
Let's move on. Financial Industry Regulatory Authority is returning to pre-pandemic regulations for working from home. The last time we had you on the program, we cited a couple of court cases that probably indicated which direction employers were heading. What does this mean for bankers, Graham?
So basically, the banks in America, the main banks, have now said, we do not have the resources, the time, or the inclination to be regularly going and checking your home to make sure it's a safe workspace. Consequently, we now want you back in the office full time. And that's what will happen here. That ruling in Adelaide we saw a few weeks ago where the council worker working from home fell over a gate and got workers' compensation because the entire house was viewed as a workplace, not just the office where she was working. That straight away sent alarm bells. What's happening in America now is really just following on from that. And it will happen here because you cannot have employers having to check your entire house and gardens to make sure it's a safe place to work from. It just can't happen.
No.
So consequently, I think we thought in the new year there'd be more of a push to get people back in the office. This is just going to push that even quicker now. Employers saying, no, back in the office, we can't afford it to have you working from home and injuring yourself because we're liable.
All thanks to the workers' compensation puppy case. But anyway, an International Monetary Fund blog has argued, Graham, that working from home can boost productivity and power economic growth. Is this something Australia can afford to lose if that's the case?
Look, I really don't. These reports you see quite often, and there's many reports saying how good it is or how bad it is. I think it depends who does the report and on what industries they look at.
Yes.
And if you look from people, IT, for instance, they normally work by themselves, but they can work from home without any interruptions. They love it. But the majority of people don't work that way. So a lot depends on who you're actually doing the survey on and what industries you're looking at. Manufacturing can't work from home.
Yeah.
Hospitality can't work from home. So it can't be across all industries. So I think these reports are very selective who they do this research on to get the answer they want. They already know what answer they want. So who do we ask to get that answer?
Yep, very true. This is our last week together, Graham. Merry Christmas to you. We'll catch up again, no doubt, on air in 2025.
Look forward to Chris and take care.
Good on you. Thank you. From Superior People Recruitment, Graham Wynn. Now, time for your space, and you can send your emails to chrissmith@adh.tv. On the special we brought you last week on how truckies are getting by under the current conditions, Sue McCocknicky said, we love our truckies. Without them, there is no food on our tables. You're right there. Cheryl Phillips wrote in an email, Australia's not making it tough for truckies. The bloody government wants to control our lives on all fronts. I know I, for one, am on your side. That is all we've got for you tonight. We'll do it one more time for the week tomorrow night. I look forward to your company then. You enjoy your evening. This is Chris Smith Tonight.